last night after a 3-year battle with stomach cancer.
In the moments before he passed, as the larger-than-life persona of Toby Keith began to fade, a rumor started. It was just a whisper at first, a post here and there on social media, but it quickly grew into a full-blown legend. The story says that at 62, just before stomach cancer took him, the famously outspoken country titan finally made a list of his legendary grudges. He supposedly named the 4 musicians he just could not stand. A final settling of scores from a man who never, ever shied away from a fight. This isn't just celebrity gossip. This is about the unwritten history of modern country music, the backstage stare-downs and public feuds that defined an era. What if the truth behind it all is more complex and far more explosive than we ever imagined? Toby Keith was never just a musician. He was a force of nature. A 6'4", self-proclaimed Big Dog Daddy, from Oklahoma who stormed Nashville with a guitar in one hand and a middle finger practically ready in the other. For over 30 years, he sold more than 40 million albums and charted 61 singles on Billboard, with 20 of them hitting #1. He built an empire on a persona. He was the unapologetic American, the bar-owning, Ford truck-driving patriot who gave a voice to millions. Songs like "Should Have Been a Cowboy" weren't just hits, they were cultural touchstones, but with that massive success came a reputation for confrontation. Toby Keith was a man of deep convictions, and he refused to apologize for them. He was a registered Democrat for most of his life who somehow became a conservative icon. He wrote surprisingly tender songs but was often painted as a one-dimensional warmonger. This complexity meant he clashed, loudly and publicly, with his peers. He fought with critics, he fought with record executives, and he went to war with fellow artists who dared question his patriotism or his music. So, when the internet started buzzing with claims that Keith had a final hate list, it felt plausible. It felt true to the man who built a career on telling people exactly what he thought. While no major news outlet has ever produced a deathbed transcript of this list, the breadcrumbs are all there, scattered throughout decades of interviews and public spats. To figure out who might be on such a list, we have to follow those crumbs. These aren't just feuds, they're the stories that define the fault lines in country music. This is the investigation into the 4 names that, in all likelihood, Toby Keith took to his grave. If there's one name that is absolutely, without a doubt, the first entry on any list of Toby Keith's rivals, it's Natalie Maines, the fiery lead singer of the Chicks. Their feud wasn't just a quiet disagreement, it was a full-blown cultural war that played out on the biggest stages in America. It was a conflict that defined not only their careers but an entire, politically charged era of country music. The spark that lit the inferno was a song, courtesy of the Red, White and Blue, the Angry American. Keith wrote it in a 20-minute burst of emotion after his father, an Army veteran, passed away, and right after the 9/11 attacks. The song was a raw, visceral howl of grief and patriotic fury. Lines like, "We'll put a boot in your ass, it's the American way," became a rallying cry for many. But for others, it was a step too far. And the most prominent voice of that opposition was Natalie Maines. In an interview in August 2002, she didn't just criticize the song, she eviscerated it. "I hate it," she said bluntly. "It's ignorant, and it makes country music sound ignorant." In the world of Nashville, where artists rarely criticize one another publicly, this was a bombshell. And Toby Keith was not the man to let an attack go unanswered. His response was swift and dismissive. "I'm a songwriter," he told CMT. "She's not." He belittled her opinion, suggesting it held no more weight than that of a homeless person. This was just the opening shot. The feud simmered for months, a nasty undercurrent in Nashville. Then, in March 2003, Natalie Maines handed Toby Keith a stockpile of ammunition. At a concert in London, just before the U.S. invasion of Iraq, Maines told the crowd, "We do not want this war, this violence, and we're ashamed that the President of the United States is from Texas." The backlash was immediate and catastrophic. Country radio stations banned their music. Fans smashed their CDs in public protests. The Dixie Chicks, arguably the biggest act in country music, were cancelled overnight. Toby Keith, now seen as the patriot Maines had insulted, took a victory lap. But he didn't just celebrate, he poured gasoline on the fire. During his tour in 2003, he started projecting a massive, doctored image during his performance of Courtesy of the Red, White and Blue. It showed Natalie Maines standing right next to Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein. The implication was clear and brutal: she was a traitor. For many, this was a vicious, personal attack. Keith, however, remained unapologetic. Maines responded in kind. At the ACM Awards in May 2003, she walked the red carpet wearing a T-shirt with the letters FUTK on the front. The band's official line was that it stood for Freedom, United, Together in Kindness. Nobody bought it. Years later, Maines confirmed what everyone already knew: the letters stood for Fuck You, Toby Keith. That same night, the crowd booed loudly when the Dixie Chicks were nominated for Entertainer of the Year, an award that Toby Keith won. The feud had become the biggest story in country music. But eventually, even for Toby, the fight grew tiresome. In August 2003, he said he was done with it. The reason? A close friend had just lost his 2-year-old daughter to cancer. Keith said, "I saw a picture, with a picture of me and Natalie, and it said, 'Fight to the death,' or something. It seemed so insignificant. I said, enough is enough." Even then, he couldn't resist one final jab, making it clear he was ending a fight he didn't start. While the hatchet was eventually buried, the ground above it was forever scarred. The war with Natalie Maines cemented his image as a patriot, but it also painted him as a bully. For a man who lived by his convictions and never forgot a slight, it's almost impossible to imagine that the name Natalie Maines wasn't the first to cross his mind. The second name on this list doesn't come from a long media war, but from a single, explosive backstage encounter. This was a different kind of conflict for Toby Keith, a clash of generations and what it means to be a country music outlaw. The man on the other side was none other than Kris Kristofferson, a Rhodes Scholar, an Army Ranger, and one of the most revered songwriters in history. The story is the stuff of legend, told most famously by actor Ethan Hawke in Rolling Stone. The setting was Willie Nelson's 70th birthday concert in New York City in April 2003. The timing was critical. The invasion of Iraq had begun just weeks earlier. According to Hawke, Toby Keith, who was riding high on the success of his war anthem, approached a group that included Kristofferson, Willie Nelson, and Hawke himself. As he passed Kristofferson, Keith allegedly muttered, "None of that lefty shit out there tonight, Chris." Kristofferson, a lifelong lefty, didn't take it well. Hawke wrote that he immediately challenged Keith. "What the fuck did you just say to me?" he growled. Willie, sensing disaster, pleaded with Keith not to rile up his old friend. But Keith didn't back down. "You heard me," he replied. "This is where it escalated." "Don't turn your back to me, boy," Kristofferson shouted. Keith turned back, reportedly saying, "I don't want any problems, Chris." What followed, according to Hawke, was an epic dressing down. Kristofferson, the Army veteran, allegedly challenged Keith's patriotic credentials. "You ever worn your country's uniform?" he asked, reportedly ending the tirade with a simple command: "Shut the fuck up." To cap it off, Hawke wrote that Kristofferson turned to him and quoted Waylon Jennings about artists like Keith: "They're doin' to country music what pantyhose did to finger fuckin'." It was an explosive story that perfectly captured the cultural divide in country music. But did it actually happen? Toby Keith furiously denied it, calling Hawke's story a fictitious fucking lie. Kristofferson's response was more complicated. At first, he said he had no memory of it, adding that there's a lot he doesn't remember. But then, the story took another turn. When a reporter followed up, Kristofferson again said he couldn't recall the incident, but then dropped a bombshell, but his wife does. Lisa Myers, Kristofferson's wife, apparently remembered the event clearly. This suggests something happened that night, even if the details were embellished. This feud was quieter than his battle with Maines, but it was deeper. It was a clash of philosophies. Keith's patriotism was direct and aggressive. Kristofferson's was questioning and complex. For Keith, being challenged by a legend like Kristofferson, a respected veteran, must have stung in a way that criticism from Maines never could. It was a dismissal from the old guard, and likely a confrontation he never forgot. Not all of Toby Keith's enemies were people. One of his longest and most bitter feuds was with the Nashville music industry itself. For most of his career, Keith saw himself as an outsider fighting a corporate system, the Nashville machine, that he believed was trying to turn him into something he wasn't. This war started almost the second he got to Music City. After years of playing in bars, Keith finally got a meeting with a record executive. The verdict was brutal. The executive told him his songs weren't good enough and that he needed to work on his songwriting. One of those, not good enough, songs was, "Should Have Been a Cowboy." It would go on to be his first #1 hit and the most played country song of the 1990s. This early rejection set the stage for a lifetime of conflict. The breaking point came with, "How Do You Like Me Now?" It was a defiant anthem aimed at an old flame, but it was also a clear message to the Nashville establishment that had doubted him. His label, Mercury Records, refused to release it as a single, fearing it was too aggressive. This was the ultimate betrayal for Keith. He knew he had a hit, and the label was burying it. So, he did something almost unheard of. He spent his own money, over $90,000, to buy back the album from Mercury. He then walked it across the street to DreamWorks Records. Even there, the fight wasn't over. His new producer also had doubts. But Keith held his ground, and the song became a monster hit, spending 5 weeks at #1. It was the ultimate vindication. Keith bet on himself against the entire Nashville machine, and he won. The lesson he learned was simple: never trust the suits. This distrust defined the rest of his career. Even as a superstar, he felt the industry never truly accepted him, consistently snubbing him for major awards. The conflict came to a head again when DreamWorks was bought by Universal Music Group, putting him back under the same corporate umbrella as Mercury. When they clashed over his next single, he didn't just threaten to leave, he announced he was starting his own record label. In 2005, he founded Show Dog Nashville. It was the ultimate act of defiance. If he couldn't get a fair shake from the Nashville machine, he would just build his own. This lifelong battle shaped him as much as any personal feud. His hatred wasn't for one person, but for the entire corporate culture he felt stifled real artists. This powerful, intangible entity was one of his greatest adversaries. So who's the fourth name? After the wars with Natalie Maines, Kris Kristofferson, and the Nashville establishment, the final spot gets a little murky. This is where the legend of the deathbed list meets the reality of a life filled with smaller conflicts. One name that has popped up in online discussions is Taylor Swift. This might seem shocking, but their careers are ironically intertwined. It all started when Keith founded his label, Show Dog Nashville, in 2005. At the same time, an executive named Scott Borchetta was starting his own label, Big Machine Records. Keith became a crucial early investor in Borchetta's venture. One of the very first artists Borchetta signed was a teenage songwriter named Taylor Swift. This means that for a huge part of her early career, every album she sold, from her debut to Star 1989 Star, put money directly into Toby Keith's pocket. There are even photos of a young, wide-eyed Swift looking up to Keith, a titan of the industry she was just entering. Of course, their paths diverged dramatically. Their quiet financial link was severed when Swift entered into a bitter public battle with Borchetta over the ownership of her master recordings. Her decision to re-record her first 6 albums was a protest against the very business structure Keith had helped create. Was there any bad blood between them? It's highly unlikely. When Keith passed away in February 2024, artists from all over the music world offered public condolences. But from the Swift camp, there was only silence. This was probably because their worlds had simply drifted too far apart. But the complex, ironic history is there. Ultimately, searching for a fourth name might miss the point. Perhaps the fourth slot wasn't for a person at all, but for the media critics he felt misrepresented him, or the politicians he disagreed with. Or maybe, the list itself is what matters. Toby Keith passed away on February 5, 2024, at 62, after a tough battle with stomach cancer. He fought it with the same grit that defined his life, performing a series of sold-out shows in Vegas just 2 months before his death. In his final interviews, he wasn't the angry American. He was a man who seemed at peace. So, is the story of Toby Keith's final list true? The reality is, we'll never know for sure. No verified source has ever confirmed it. But in digging for it, we've uncovered the conflicts that would absolutely be candidates. There was the fiery culture war with Natalie Maines, the tense ideological showdown with Chris Christopherson, and the lifelong, bitter war against the Nashville Machine. These feuds weren't just about personal dislike. They were about patriotism, artistic integrity, and a fierce refusal to be told what to do. He was a polarizing figure. You either loved him or you hated him. He was a songwriter of immense talent, a philanthropist who did incredible work for kids with cancer, and a devoted family man. The legend of the list persists because Toby Keith was a fighter. He lived his life out loud, and he left behind a legacy that is as complex and controversial as it is celebrated. Real or not, the stories behind the list are what truly matter. They tell the story of a true American original, but now we want to hear from you. What do you think of these feuds? Were you Team Toby or Team Natalie? And who do you think might have been the fourth name on the list? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this, make sure to like and subscribe for more deep dives into the legends of country music. Thanks for watching.